Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is the tutorial of my spring jacket Sonja, and if you haven't already, you can go and watch the making of where I'm doing the mock-up that you can see right there in the background. So if you're interested in that, links will be in the cards and in the description down below. As always, the pattern will also be linked down below. That is the most direct way to support me and keep videos just like this one coming. So thank you so much for checking that out if you're interested. And another thing, I really had troubles deciding what kind of fabric I should use for this design. Thank you so much for everybody who helped me decide. I checked all of the comments, all of the DMs, and then I also asked you guys on my Instagram stories what you would do. So thank you so much for everybody who, shared their opinion, and we decided on a fabric, which you're going to see in just a second. With all of that said, let's get started with the tutorial. So I decided on the synthetic leather, and the reason for that is that I just simply did not want to spend any more money because the jacket will look really nice out of this material as well. It is what I planned in the very beginning anyway, so I'm totally fine with that now. I know I said that I'm not 100% on board with the synthetic leather, but as you can see in the background, I started working on the jacket yesterday, prepared one pocket for example, and the sleeve as you can see here. Obviously we're going to do both of that together today, and I actually really enjoyed it and I really like how this looks. It looks super clean, and I think it's gonna look really relaxed, I guess, and really chill once everything is completed. I am really excited to work on this project. Actually, you guys wanted me to do option 3, which is something that I did not anticipate. My favorite, by the way, was the double face. I might do this jacket out of the double face as well in the future at some point if I have time, because I really liked this material, and it would be perfect for a jacket like this because you need a material that, has a little bit of strength. Like, it should not be too flimsy. It should have, some strength to it. So that material was perfect as it was strong enough. It was not too heavy but thicker, and obviously you have this play on colors with the outside being different to the inside, so that is something really nice as well. The fabric that you guys chose actually was my least favorite. It probably would have not been the best material for a non-lined jacket. If you want to line this jacket, obviously you can manipulate the pattern and do a lining pattern as well. If you guys have any questions on that, I actually have a booklet on, doing exactly that on anything coats. So there's also explained in there how you can develop a lining pattern from a non-lined pattern. And then you could also work with option 3, the fabric, and stabilize it however you stabilize coats. Obviously, then the material is stronger as well, and you could work with that for the jacket as well. But as it was, I wasn't happy with that, so I just went ahead and chose my second choice, I guess, my second favorite, which is the synthetic leather. So let's go ahead and also get started with that. So as you can see, I prepped my sleeve already, and then I also prepped my front piece with the pocket. And we're going to start with the pocket because I just like to work on the pockets while everything is still flat and lays flat and nice, because you can just access the area easier. So we're gonna do a welt pocket with a 5cm welt. The first thing that I did was to actually fold the welt itself at the fold line, and I used some hem tape, thicker hem tape, to actually glue the two sides together, because the synthetic material does not iron super well. It does, but it doesn't hold its shape, and I think it also gives strength to the welt itself, so I preferred doing that. Obviously you want to use some sort of cloth or some sort of scrap fabric that you can use to put over your piece while ironing. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I am using steam for the synthetic material, but obviously it doesn't breathe well, so you don't necessarily have to. Just need to check with your specific fabric if it works for you or if it doesn't. But for the sake of the hem tape, I will steam so it is hot enough so that it actually melts and sticks. And now I'm just gonna you know, tear off some pieces and put that between the two sides. So as you can see, it stays, but I don't think it irons too well, so I just like to use that to fix it even better. So with this now folded, I'm actually going to go ahead and do a little decorative seam right here next to the fold line. You don't have to do that, you can. So just decide what kind of design you want, and then you do that onto your welt right now. Like that. And I don't know if you can see it, let me zoom you in. I'm actually using 2 threads to sew this, because I think it's really cute to have this kind of shifting effect. Like you see one thread rather than the other, depending on how you look at it. And I have this kind of more reddish thread, and then I have a more beige thread. And I use both of these for my bobbin and the upper thread. So you can simply just use 2 threads as one. Just use a thicker needle and try out how your seam looks like to get also a neat result here on the bobbin side. That, for me at least, I had to do the tension. I had to set it really high so that this looks really nice, but I really quite like the result. So that is just a little play, I guess, that I am doing here. Obviously a thicker, like 40, I would say. Thread would also be perfectly fine, a denim thread that is. So use whatever you like, but always do a stitch test before you actually sew your real fabric. I marked my placement of my pocket on my front piece, and right here is my side seam, and right there is my center front. So obviously this needs to lay in the end like so, with your hand being able to go in from this side, from the side seam side. So I want to mark onto the wrong side of the welt also my seam allowances. That just makes it so much easier to sew this in like so. And this just gets placed right on top here. Actually, let me elongate this line so that I can really precisely place the welt on top here. Right there. It fits perfectly on there with the crisscross here. And now I want to go from this crisscross all the way over to this one and sew the welt onto my front piece. So that's now done, and I'm just quickly gonna mark the center line because we're gonna cut towards the edges now. So I'm gonna fold this in half and then just clip into here. And now I'm just gonna follow my line here and go towards the edges. And I wanna stop around 1 millimeter before I hit the stitching line, or the marking, same thing, like that. And now I can flip this, put the seam allowances towards the inside, take out the triangles here on the sides, and stitch down here, making sure that I stay on my 1 centimeter line. And this is just gonna fix these in place, and I'm gonna do the same thing up here, like so. Okay, and I'm gonna steam it again. And that is what it looks like now. So let's continue with this side. I personally like to iron the fold line here in place so that I have somewhat of a guidance once I put my pocket there. So for the pocket, you have a bigger pocket and then you have a smaller pocket. And basically the welt right here is missing from the smaller pocket. So my side seam is right here, my front is right here. So I'm gonna place the bigger one right on top here with my seam allowance being 1 centimeter. I have to match up the stitching line right here with this piece that we cut right here. So this is 2.5 centimeters. So I have to match that up. That's also super practical that I have the guiding line basically here, because now I can just put these together like so. And basically align the stitching line of my pocket with the ironed fold in here so that I know exactly where to place this. And then I want to go from here to here and sew. And now with that done, I can put the other side of my pocket onto the other side of my welt right here. and also stitch it down. I'm gonna iron the smaller one towards the front where it's also gonna lay in the end. And once I flip this and fold it on top, these should more or less match up. If you've done it perfectly, they should perfectly match up. They don't with me either. It doesn't really matter at all anyways, but what matters is actually once you fold it on top here is that you don't make them match up, because then everything up here is gonna wrinkle. So you're just gonna put them however they fall and then pin them together just as they are and sew them together as they are. So this avoids any wrinkles, this avoids any bulking up or whatever, anything that doesn't look nice. And what I like to do is also cut down the seam allowances right here that you can see, and then finish this whole thing up with bias binding, which I'm going to do all around this piece right here. And now I want to add some bar tacks right here so that everything lays flat and nice, and then also that it doesn't rip out. So this gives also some strength. You can see these rectangles here. I'm just going to copy that over to this one, and then I'm going to iron it again so that it doesn't, you know, wrinkle up that much as it does right now. That's through the ironing. And that is the pocket completely done. As you can see, really like this. So we can continue now. So you have your back piece, and the next thing that we're going to work on is actually the collar piece right here, because we need that in place in order to put the front pieces on there. So you have a collar facing and a collar shell. You're going to take the bigger one, which is the shell piece, and you're just going to match up the center back notches, and then obviously also the stitching line of your shoulder area. If need be, you can always cut towards your stitching line right here so it opens up. My pieces are stretchy, so I'm probably only going to have to cut towards the stitching line once I iron. So just going to fix these in place and sew at 1 centimeter. Since I am working with synthetic leather, I actually decided to kind of glue the seam allowance up into the collar because I don't want to have any top stitches as of right now. I might do some decorative ones once, you know, the facing and the collar itself and everything is done. So for now, I'm just gonna place some hem tape right here and glue the seam allowance up that way. And that is what it looks like. This could probably use another iron from the right side as well. And with this now in place, we can put the right sides of our front and back pieces together. You're going to find a notch that marks a seam right here. So put that together and repeat for the other side. To finish this seam, because it will be partially visible, other than this seam, which will be covered by the facing, I'm going to use bias binding just as I did for the pocket. So basically any seam from now on, I'm gonna finish with bias binding, and that's just gonna, you know, hide the raw edge right here. And then probably I'll top stitch it towards the back. I'm not sure about that yet because I don't necessarily want to have too many top stitches visible, but I'll hem tape it also towards the back. If it doesn't work, I'll also top stitch it down. That's the plan. Bias binding on every seam basically that is visible on the inside to finish everything. I stopped the bias binding right here just before the bulk of that seam because there will be the facing probably going until here, so there is no need for the bias binding to continue on, and it's just gonna add more layers, more bulk. So just stop right there before the seam allowance and everything else will be covered. But still, we have to iron this seam allowance, and I'm probably gonna cut away a teeny tiny bit of this, and then I like to cut into that seam allowance because I essentially want to debulk everything here, and the easiest way is to just iron this open. And then right here, I might just have to add some sort of bar tag into the seam, something like that, because I am pretty much sure, at least my material, you can iron it if you're working with, you know, any sort of woven fabric. But this is super bulky, and I think it's just the easiest if I just sew it in place right here with a teeny tiny bar tag. I actually decided to do a small little section right here just to fix the seam allowance on the inside in place, because I was not able to really iron, nor was I able to therefore also use hem tape. I could use leather glue, but I don't have one right now here with me. So I just went ahead and did this small little top stitch on both sides, and I think that looks also really cute as well. So we can now continue putting the sleeves in, or rather finishing the sleeves. So let's put this aside. I have one sleeve already done, and this is what it looks like. Obviously, this is the hem facing, so this will sit like so. In the very end, I'm going to add top stitches to fix it in place as well, and then also probably some hem tape to glue this part in place. But basically that is what we want to achieve. So the first thing that I want to do is put the darts in right here. I actually went ahead and basted a layer of slippery fabric, you can use lining if you like, to this piece right here, because you know, it's just easier to put your jacket on. And I'm just gonna work with this as one layer because it's the easiest. It's not the neatest looking because you're gonna see that one seam in the upper sleeve seam right here. You're gonna see the seam allowance up here. I don't really mind it. If you want to do it 100% correctly, you can just make the sleeve one more time in lining and then put it onto your shoulder seam and onto your hem facing seam as well, and then finish it that way. Then you have no visible seams of your sleeve at all. So if you rather want to do that, feel free to do that, but this is just the easiest in my opinion. So I'm just gonna put right sides of my sleeve together to finish the darts. I'm going to do the two, and then I'm going to add top stitching to the dart, which looks like this. So I'm basically just going to go around them like this to just have them face in one direction specifically. So this is going to face towards the back sleeve. I think it also looks really nice from the right side, so we want to do that. So this is what it looks like, and as you can see, I had some issues with my thread right here. So what I did to not have, you know, knotted ends or like back tacking somewhere in the middle of my sewing, I basically just went into the last stitch without back tacking, cut down the upper thread to a little bit, and then I can just pull on the back and it pulls through the thread. Sometimes you also have to do it with some tool. I like my seam ripper for that. And basically now I'm just gonna cut down all of these threads to 1 centimeter or so. And since I am working with synthetic material or like thread, I can simply just melt these down and have everything fixed in place like that. And this will never be undone or come undone. And I just managed to fix an issue basically that occurred during the sewing process. Now I'm just gonna iron the seam allowance of my dart towards the upper sleeve seam, and I just also want to just flatten the seam as well. And now I can add my other sleeve piece right here by just putting right sides together again and closing the upper sleeve seam. Let's also iron the seam allowance open. You can also finish the seam here with some bias binding. I opted to just overlock these two seams just for the one reason that it is less work. But obviously you're gonna see the upper portion of the seam in the sleeve when you look on the inside of the jacket. So if you don't like this look, you're free to do whatever finish you like for this seam. I just went with overlocking. And now with that done, we can add the hem facing. Right here, right sides together. I will finish this side now, or you can also do it afterwards, doesn't matter, but this side needs to be finished with bias binding. So let's just add the bias binding now, and then we're gonna put right sides together of the sleeve hem facing and the sleeve, and sew this on right here. And then I'm also going to understitch it as I did on this sleeve here to fix the seam allowance in place, facing into the sleeve hem facing. Okay, and now, this is for me at least, gonna get a little bit tricky because it's getting rather thick. I want to iron the sleeve hem facing towards the inside with, you know, the ditch of the seam facing also the inside, but I have to also use this cloth, so this is gonna be a bit challenging, but should work. I also made sure to clip into the seam allowance every centimeter or so that I am able to iron this nicely now, right here at the curve, otherwise this would not lay flat. And this will be fixed with a top stitch once everything is in place. Okay, that's what it's gonna end up looking like. Obviously we're gonna add the top stitch right here, but basically like that. Now we can already go ahead and put the sleeve into our corpus. Now remember, the sleeve seam right here marks the back, so I know exactly that this has to go into this armhole right here. And I'm just gonna put right sides together and match up the notches. You're gonna find a notch for the shoulder and then also two notches for the sleeve notches in the sleeve and in the bodice. In the body of the jacket, I guess. And I'm gonna finish this seam as well with bias binding. Same thing here, if you have trouble matching the seams up because the sleeve usually is a little bit bigger than the armhole, that is the sleeve ease, you just have to ease, you can see it here as well. You have to ease both of these lengths together. And if you have troubles with that, for me, my materials are a teeny tiny bit stretchy and they also lay somewhat on the bias, so they are stretchy generally. You can also just clip into the seam allowance here and it opens up a bit better. But don't think that there's anything wrong or whatever if your sleeve, generally speaking, is a tiny bit bigger than your armhole. That is just normal. And you actually intentionally, because it just shapes the shoulder better, put a little bit of this sleeve ease into your sleeve head. And because I have sloped shoulders, the sleeve ease is actually pretty small because I don't really need a shaped sleeve. It should generally just continue on into the sleeve, so there is not that much for my pattern right here. But obviously if you have a very nicely shaped sleeve right here, sits on the shoulder and whatever, for a blazer for example, then you have a bit more. It just depends on the design and, you know, the purpose, but generally speaking there is something called the sleeve ease, and it's not a wrong pattern or something like that because they don't perfectly fit together. So with that said, let's put the sleeve in and then also the other side. Okay, so the seam is now done and also bound, and now I'm just gonna grab my tailor's hem. Right here I'm using quite a curvy one because it works better for me for the sleeve, and now I'm just gonna iron the seam allowance into the sleeve with a lot of steam. I want this to be crisp, and I'm gonna work my way towards the side seams on either side. And look at that, that is what it's supposed to look like. Really, really nice and crisp, perfect result. And now I'm gonna go ahead and put the side seam together. On the other side, I decided to bind the edges separately. This is gonna create like a lot of bulk underneath the arm. I'm not sure if I want to recommend that because it is pretty bulky. I'd suggest you overlock the sleeve side seam, this piece right here that goes into the sleeve, and instead of that bind this upper sleeve seam because it is more visible and it doesn't bulk as much because there is no intersection basically where it goes across. So if you want to either or do rather the upper sleeve seam than the side seam, if you have a woven fabric, this would be no problem at all because you can simply iron it and it will just fall in place basically. Since this is the synthetic leather, I just feel like it is very thick right here. That's just something that I wanted to point out. So this depends on your preference and on your material choice. It's super individual. I'm just gonna mirror it because I already did it on one side. So I'm just gonna bind this edge and then the other and then close the side seam like that. But I don't think that I would necessarily recommend it for the synthetic leather. I want to iron the seam allowance open, and then also while I'm at that, I want to flip this up and iron like that already. So for that, I want to make a little bit of room right here as there's a lot of bulk because of the seam allowances. So I'm gonna cut out these kind of U-shaped pieces right here. And then I'm also gonna cut down these edges up here so that they don't peek through, and just with my fingers open up the seam allowance at that area so that once I fold it up, I feel already that it is so much easier to fold this up. I can just pin this in place. I'm not pinning through the whole piece, I'm just gonna pin. I can feel on with my finger that it is not completely through the piece. I'm gonna sew at 3 centimeters so none of the pins will be in my way. I just like to have these as a little bit of security. Carefully with the needles and just turn this right sides out, and that is the side seam done. That's that. Let's finish the sleeve hem. Okay, so now that the shell is done, we can continue with the facing. And the facing is pretty straightforward. We only have 4 pieces left. So what I like to do is we have our back neck facing right here. And in order to put this onto our front facings, we have to add the collar first. So this is the collar facing. Same as for the shell, we're gonna put right sides together with the smaller circle of the back neck facing. You can, if you need to, cut towards the stitching line in the back neck facing. It's just easier for the fabric to open up and to be able to match both lengths together. Like that, you can see how it opens up, and the same thing for this side. And now I'm just going to put this together. And with that now done, it is super easy. We're just going to fit both of my front pieces onto this piece. There should be a notch for the neckline right here. So we're just going to match this up, and then also we're going to match the other side up. Just make sure that this lays correctly. So the collar needs to be sewn at the side where there is the lapel on both sides. Like that. I also went ahead and did the same top stitches that I did for the shell. I just did it here at the neck area because I don't want to have them visible right here. I'm going to try to iron this open. I'm going to use hem tape again. So with the facing now completely done, as you can see, I ironed everything open and it looks nice from the outside and the inside. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the inside seam right here that won't get sewn onto anything, like this straight seam right here, with bias binding. So now, before I'm actually sewing the facing in, I want to go ahead and also finish the upper line of my hem facing. And I have my facing that reaches until the center front notch right here. So I want to start finishing that seam just a tiny bit before that, maybe 2 centimeters before that, all the way to the other side, also 2 centimeters more than the center front, so that once everything is finished, you know, you have at the center front seam, you have a finished edge that goes all around the jacket. And that is what it looks like once everything gets folded up like this. Everything here, also the raw edge of the bias binding here, will be hidden. And now it's time to put the facing on. So we're gonna put the facing right sides onto our shell. I like to start at the center back, right here. Pin everything together, match up all of the seams. And then right here, you also want to match up everything. Here you have to be kind of precise, especially right here at the gorge, that everything fits together well. So like that. And then we're just gonna work our way down. You want to have more space for the facing, as the facing is going to sit on the outside, and you want to iron the ditch of the seam towards the shell therefore, so you need more space for the facing to kind of go around that area. And right here, before I actually pin everything down, I like to finish my seam down here, because once that is sewn together, and I can do that right in front of the sewing machine, once everything here, like this section here, is sewn together, this will be ironed up so that the finished seam right here will fold upwards, and this will lay like this. So once that is finished, I can just simply in one go sew over top all of this, and once everything is turned right sides out, it is perfectly correct already. You don't need to do a bunch of ironing or maneuvering around. I think that's just the easiest, but I like to do that in one go essentially. So I'm gonna pin this, sew this, and then fold at my hem facing notch right here and turn this upwards, and then just for the sake of the bias binding, just gonna sew the seam allowance facing up and then go around the whole piece that way. Okay, with all of that prepped, let's sew the hem facing seam here first and then go around the whole thing. So before doing anything, I actually like to fix this seam right here in place. So as I said before, I am going to iron this up so that this seam right here sits correctly, which is facing upwards, so that you have the nice finished edge. And I will probably also fix this in place with some glue. And then if I flip this over, you can see, first of all, that this is not glued down, obviously, because we only glued the upper portion. So I still have some room to kind of maneuver this piece around here, so that from the right side, this looks nice as well. So I'm just gonna use another piece and put it in between here. I always just switch it over to a colder surface, basically, so that the glue kind of sets. And now this is what it looks like, which looks really nice. We can continue with cutting down the seam allowance as preparation to turn everything right sides over. Right here until the notch, I want to cut down the seam allowance of the facing, and then right there at the notch I'm gonna switch to the shell, because that is essentially also how I will iron everything. So I want to cut the side down that won't be visible. Right here at the round area, I'm actually going to cut down both of the layers because there is no room basically. So I just need to debulk everything here. And I also want to clip very carefully into the seam allowance here. And then from here out on until I reach the shoulder seam, I'm going to cut down the shell again till here. And then here it switches again. And I'm going to repeat the same for the other side. Right here also the bulk of that seam I also want to cut down on both of the seam allowances, just so that it is not too bulky. And then right here I'm going to switch again, cut down the facing. For this I am going to very carefully cut towards that stitch here. I'm going to stop at about 1 millimeter before that, and I also want to cut down the seam allowance here to about 3 millimeters, something like that, just because there's also no room on the inside. So let's just cut down the edges completely and then the seam allowance like so. And we're gonna go back to 1 centimeter here. There just gets the shell taken off until I reach the notch again, and then I'm going to switch again. There's a lot of switching here in this particular project, but it's going to be nice and worth it at the end. So right here there's the notch, so let's switch again. Like that. I'm just going to prepare the seam and then we can turn everything right sides out. Okay, and now let's very carefully turn everything right sides out. And for this, obviously, a former like this is super helpful. Obviously, if you're working with woven fabric, ironing is an absolute must. So I would just iron the jacket right here. But as I am working with synthetic leather, I am just going to kind of roll out the seam. And then I'm going to top stitch this seam basically where it's supposed to be. So with everything now turned right sides out, I'm actually going to spend probably a long time ironing because I want my edges to be crisp. I'm going to use a thicker hem tape that I will put throughout the lapel and facings and stuff like that, so that I have a perfectly crisp edge everywhere. Right here where the back neck facing is, I actually did a bar tag right here in the ditch of my shoulder seam to keep this down, otherwise you risk it just flopping up like that all the time. And you also want to do that right here, or rather right here in the ditch of the back neck seam here as well, and then the facings are completely done. And you want to add the buttonholes and then obviously also the buttons. And that's it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I am super stoked with this jacket. I can see myself wearing it all the time, especially because the weather is so weird at the moment. Like, we had 30 degrees almost the other day, and today it just snowed. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. If you haven't already, also check out my Instagram. I am doing small tips and tricks, hacks and stuff like that all around my sewing projects. That's definitely something worth checking out. The most direct way to support me and keep videos just like this one coming is to head over to my Etsy store. You'll find the direct link to this pattern in the video description box down below. So thank you so much for supporting me. Any tools that you saw in this video are linked down below via affiliate links. Obviously you're not gonna pay any more, I just get a small share for referring you guys. Last but not least, a special thank you to my channel members. You can get exclusive benefits through the link in the description down below. So thank you so much for watching again, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!